We didn't discover ourselves in the 20th century, we installed a new self, a version of us designed in boardrooms, war rooms, and psychoanalyst offices. Most of us secretly feel like something is off. We scroll, we buy, and we express ourselves, and somehow we still feel as though we're like NPCs in someone else's story. What if the modern self was engineered on purpose? A doctor in Vienna cracks open the human mind and finds a nest of hungry animals. His nephew then takes those ideas and teaches corporations how to make us want things that we don't need. Governments, spy agencies, and therapists then use the same playbook to manage our feelings, our fears, and even our rebellion. This is the century of self in one sitting, not as a dusty documentary, but as a user manual for why we feel the way that we feel now and how to start becoming something else. Now picture Vienna about 100 years ago. So you've got marble halls, strict manners, and don't you dare show how you actually feel in public kind of vibes. So in that world, Sigmund Freud drops a bomb. Underneath our nice, polite exterior live primitive sexual and aggressive drives. If we don't control them, individuals and our entire societies go off the rails. And then World War I happens. Trenches, gas, mass slaughter. Freud looks at Europe tearing itself apart and says, yeah, that's what I've been talking about this whole time. And from that moment on, a suspicion starts to spread among the people in charge. And that's that maybe ordinary people can't be trusted. Maybe they're not rational citizens, and maybe there's a wild animal under the suit and tie. That fear of us is the seed everything else grows from. Enter Edward Bernays, so Freud's American nephew. He's working for the US government in World War I, helping sell the idea that America is going to Europe to make the world safe for democracy. He watches propaganda turn a politician into a mythic liberator, and he thinks to himself, if we can do this in war, why not in peace? So after the war, propaganda becomes a dirty word. So he rebrands it and calls it public relations. Then he has his big breakthrough. At the time, women aren't supposed to smoke in public. It's a total taboo. So American Tobacco comes to Bernays and says, we're missing out on half of our market. Go fix it. So he goes to a psychoanalyst and asks, what do cigarettes mean to women? And the answer was that symbolically it represents a penis, aka male power. So Bernays stages a stunt at the New York Easter Parade, and he gets a group of young debutantes to hide cigarettes under their clothes, and at his signal in the front of the press, they all light up at the same time. And he tells reporters, these are torches of freedom. The next day, front pages everywhere, smoking becomes a symbol of female independence and sales explode. Nothing material changed. It's the same tobacco, it's the same paper. The only thing that changed was the story wrapped around the object. And Bernays realized, we don't sell products to a rational mind. We sell symbols to the unconscious mind. And corporations love him for it. Up until then, most people bought things based on needs. So shoes, obviously you need them. A car, you need transportation. Ads talked about durability, price, and function. But after World War I, mass production explodes. Factories can make more stuff than people technically need. So Wall Street is terrified of overproduction. And a banker named Paul Mazar writes, we must shift America from a needs culture to a desires culture. So how do they do it? Bernays steps in as the architect of that entire shift. He ties consumer goods to identity. So cars as sex appeal and status, not transportation. Clothes, a form of self-expression, not just warmth. Makeup, fashion, furniture, all ways for us to show our supposed inner self. So in the 1920s, President Herbert Hoover tells advertisers, you have taken over the job of creating desire and have transformed people into constantly moving happiness machines. That's the first big frame shift. Democracy quietly mutates from power of the people to freedom to consume. So we stop being treated as citizens who think and start being treated as consumers who feel. Not everyone buys the people are irrational animals idea. So in the 1930s, after the crash, President Roosevelt brings in social scientists like George Gallup. So Gallup believes if we ask real questions and listen, people can give us rational opinions. We can run a democracy based on what citizens think and not just what they feel. So we get opinion polling. What do you think of this policy? Approve or disapprove of this president? Roosevelt uses radio, speeches, and polls to treat people as sane adults. Meanwhile, on the other side, Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays look at the same crowds and see a bewildered herd. So Lippmann says, the public is too emotional and too easily manipulated. We need an elite to guide them. And Bernays says, the good news is I am that elite. I can manage their desires. So by the time we hit the late 1930s and the New York World's Fair, Bernays is helping design a vision of the future where democracy equals capitalism and capitalism equals consumer freedom and consumer freedom equals happiness. You don't vote by thinking anymore, you vote by buying. And that's the second big frame shift. We're still in a democracy, but the battleground is our unconscious. Then Nazi Germany collapses, the death camps are exposed, and a terrifying question hits American planners. If ordinary Germans could do that, then what are our people capable of? So during and after World War II, American soldiers break down psychologically in massive numbers. Almost half of those evacuated from combat are suffering mental collapse. Psychoanalysis step in and see confirmation of Freud. Underneath the surface, there are dark drives and fears we don't even understand. So after the war, the US passes the National Mental Health Act. And the goal isn't just healing trauma, the deeper goal is let's build citizens who are psychologically safe for democracy. Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter, thinks if we strengthen the ego, the conscious rational part, people can keep those wild unconscious forces under control. So psychoanalysis leaks out of the clinic and into schools, marriage counseling, parenting advice, social work, corporate HR, and the message under the message is this: be well adjusted, adapt to the world as it is, and don't rock the boat. At the same time, businesses grab a new upgraded version of Bernays and his playbook. Psychoanalysis like Ernest Ditcher invent focus groups and motivation research, researching things like why don't women like instant cake mix, the unconscious guilt. The solution, make them add an egg so it feels like baking, sales skyrocket. How do we sell a doll that embodies an entire fantasy of womanhood? Enter Barbie, of course. So the unconscious self is no longer just a threat to be controlled, it's a resource to be mined. We're being helped to be adjusted, productive, and satisfied as long as we stay inside the system. By the 1950s and 60s, the control project starts to show its cracks. The CIA experiments with brainwashing and LSD and brutal de-patterning in places like the Allen Memorial Institute here in Canada, trying to erase and rewrite personalities, and it fails horribly. People are left broken and not programmable. And then in culture, a backlash begins. Vance Pickard writes The Hidden Persuaders, exposing how ads and corporations use psychoanalysis to turn us into emotional puppets. Even Martin Luther King Jr. says that he's proud to be maladjusted.
I must honestly say to you that I never intend to adjust myself to racial segregation and discrimination. I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few.
And inside Anna Freud's own circle, some of the model analytic patients end in breakdowns and in suicide. The promise that experts could safely engineer our inner lives starts to look shaky. But by this point, the big move has already landed. We've accepted a version of self that is managed by experts, stimulated by brands, and soothed by consumption, and constantly nudged away from true revolt into safe, purchasable freedom. By the 1950s and 60s, the whole psychoanalytic project, the idea that experts could manage the inner lives of millions, begins to show fractures, and government experiments fail. Corporate manipulation gets exposed, and people start questioning whether adjustment is really the same thing as freedom. But the most devastating critique comes from one of Freud's own intellectual descendants, and that's Herbert Marcuse.
This is a childish application of psychoanalysis, which does not take at all into consideration the very real political systematic waste of resources, of technology, and of the productive process. For example, planned obsolescence.
Marcuse was a German philosopher trained in psychoanalysis, but he flipped the entire script. And he said this: the problem isn't the unconscious, the problem is the system. He argued that modern capitalist society doesn't just sell us products, it actually manufactures our desires, trains us to crave the things that keep the machine running, and convinces us those desires are our own. And that's the heart of his idea of the one-dimensional man, a human being whose imagination has been flattened, whose rebellion has been pre-packaged, and whose deepest longings have been replaced by the options on a supermarket shelf. Marcuse said, we don't even know we're being controlled because the system gives us everything that we think that we want. He calls this repressive desublimation, a fancy phrase for a simple idea. And the idea is this: give people enough pleasure, distraction, and self-expression, and they'll never notice their change. We don't need to be oppressed by brute force when we're kept docile by dopamine. And Marcuse believed that the psychoanalytic project had gone wrong because it focused on adjusting people to the world instead of asking whether the world itself was sick to begin with. A healthy person, he argued, might actually reject an unhealthy society, but Anna Freud and the post-war therapists were doing the opposite. They were helping people become well-adjusted to a system that was making them miserable. That's why Marcuse said that the real danger wasn't madness or aggression or unconscious impulses. The real danger was losing our capacity to imagine a different life. And that's the moment that the whole 20th century project reveals its darker truth. And that truth was this: you don't need to oppress a people who have been trained to oppress themselves. This isn't about getting paranoid every single time we walk into a grocery store. It's about seeing the operating system. Our fears of chaos were used to sell safety. Our desire for freedom was redirected into shopping, and our genuine need for meaning was fed with brands, slogans, and pre-made identities. The game isn't just about them influencing us. The game is about whether we live as manufactured selves or we start building what I call the Renaissance self. A self that knows it has an unconscious but doesn't let others weaponize it. A self that can use tools like marketing and psychology without being used by them. A self that's willing to be a little maladjusted to a system that treats humans as data points and shoppers. The scariest part of Century of Self isn't that governments and corporations tried to control us, it's that they were often right about this one thing. If we don't master ourselves, someone else will gladly do it for us. So the question isn't how do we stop them from manipulating us? The real question is, who are we going to become next? And are we willing to rip out the factory installed self and start again on purpose? If you want to go deeper into building that Renaissance version of yourself, not just escaping influence, but actually wielding it ethically, hit subscribe. We're not here to be happiness machines. We're here to be fully human once again.